2024 was an epic year for games, so here are 101 titles to play, split into 4 sections: fan favourite titles as determined by you, which perhaps didn't click with me as much, but I still recognise them to be great games; the best of the rest section, including bigger titles and early access releases, but not to the extent of AAA games; some hidden gems worth a look, and of course, my personal top 25 best games of the year. So let's begin with Penny's big breakaway. A fast-paced 3D platformer from the creators of Sonic Mania, and it absolutely nails the momentum-driven gameplay as you swing, dash, and combo through a vibrant world. Our struggling street performer protagonist gets in a bit of a pickle after her yo-yo becomes sentient and embarrasses the king, who then sends his army after Penny, so you need to run away and somehow turn this into the performance of a lifetime. Relative to its quality, I do think that the game is underperforming in terms of sales, at least on PC, which might be due to its relatively high price, but if you love the genre and want to see more games like this, do consider buying it, as will be the case for Kingsvein, a turn-based tactics title that will be for fans of the genre, which is underrepresented in big games these days, so luckily we have indie developers to pick up the slack. Set in the titular ancient city, you play as a wisp slayer, tasked with investigating and eliminating the evil forces that have consumed the city, with classic turn-based tactical combat as you command your team with access to 16 different classes, each with upgradable abilities and equipable passives. This comes to us from developer Red Codex, who specializes in this exact genre, with their other titles like Horizon's Gate being worth a play as well, with a very different kind of game being Until Then, which is set in the Philippines in a world that is still recovering from a catastrophe. This follows the story of Mark, a high school student that is going about their daily routine until a fateful meeting sets off a chain reaction of events where people start to disappear and even his own memories prove to be unreliable. This is a slice of life narrative adventure game that has those emotional beats that is similar to A Space for the Unbound, a similar kind of title but set in Indonesia, where these Southeast Asian countries have huge gaming populations, and I suppose there is some effect of seeing their own country and culture being represented in games, which has led to the popularity of these titles. That is not discounting the games themselves, since they are great narrative experiences similar to Japanese animated movies like Weathering with You in terms of vibes. So get it if you love the genre, where I do love indie games, since they just provide such a wide variety of experiences. And we can shift all the way over to CONSCRIPT, a top-down survival horror game set during World War I, where you play as a French soldier in the trenches searching for his missing brother. This feels similar to classic Resident Evil games in terms of mechanics, complete with manual save points, inventory management, scarce resources, and relentless enemies, where every decision feels like life or death. The mix of claustrophobic environments and psychological horror does leave an impression, where the horrors of war and PTSD warps your perception of what is real and what is a hallucination, with an excellently done throwback visual style as well, which fits in nicely with the setting. Going back to a more narratively driven title, we have 1000 Times Resist, a sci-fi title about uncovering lost truths in a dystopian future. The arrival of aliens, known as the Occupants, have doomed humanity, bringing with them a disease which has killed off a large percentage of humanity, but yet a teenage girl named Iris is immune and she survives. 1000 years later, Iris has become the All-Mother and has birthed a society of her own clones, and you play as such a clone, assigned to the role of a Watcher, a loyal servant of the All-Mother, until you discover a shocking secret that changes everything. Your sister, Fixer, reveals that the All-Mother has been lying to you, but she is executed for her treason, and now it is up to you to navigate this new reality. It's a puzzle adventure game where you are exploring memories while jumping back and forth through moments in time, and is one of the most intriguing stories of the year, but for a different kind of brain teaser. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes takes puzzle solving to another level. Set in a mysterious old hotel somewhere in Central Europe, our protagonist is invited to the location to participate in a project, but finds a web of cryptic riddles, secret codes, and shifting realities as she explores. It doesn't look that visually impressive but will be of interest to puzzle game fans, having an intriguing plot that will keep you going, and interestingly comes to us from the developer of Sayonara Wild Hearts, which is a very different kind of game, but if you love the genre, this is a must get. Switching gears into a more mainstream genre, the Plucky Squire will be of interest, an action-adventure title in the vein of a Zelda game, but mixes things up to include 2D platforming as well, but then the big reveal is that this is also a 3D platformer, letting you jump between the pages of a storybook and the world beyond it. This game just looks amazing both in 2D and 3D, with the developer being worth a follow on Twitter, with new mechanics being introduced at a regular clip which keeps the experience fresh and full of surprises. However, it is on the easier side of things, which is the main complaint, but if you have kids, this might be an excellent title to play together or for them to play on their own, with a decidedly not kid-friendly title being Crow Country, a throwback survival horror title with the PS1-inspired visual style, borrowing elements from some of the greats like having fixed camera angles. It is set in an abandoned amusement park where our heroine is searching for its owner who went missing 2 years ago, chancing upon all sorts of horrors which she needs to deal with. This is about as classic survival horror as it can get and is excellently done, so if you love the genre, this will be worth picking up, with an all-action title of interest being Anomaly Agent, a fast-paced 2D action platformer set in a cyberpunk city, mixing slick melee combat and a pulpy sci-fi story. You play as a cybernetic enforcer battling reality-warping anomalies with some amount of physics to the combat, as well as over-the-top humor and impressive boss designs. There is a Turkish YouTuber with 1.4 million subscribers involved in the production of this game, and is one of the more successful titles involving a YouTuber, with the success of this rolling into their next game, Anomaly President, which is in development, so check this out if you have not, in anticipation of that, with a more strategic title being Chrono Ark, a true fan favourite title, since a number of you did mention this to me in the comments, being a roguelike party-based RPG with deck building elements. You need to assemble a crew and fight your way through procedurally generated dungeons, all as you attempt to rescue the world from chaos, with fun synergies and combos between characters and abilities, with a UI and interface similar to classic Japanese-style dungeon crawlers like Action Odyssey, and should feel familiar but with a fresh twist. Speaking of roguelikes, a classic turn-based, grid-based title is Caves of Qud, which released out of early access in December, being an old-school style open-world title set in a deeply simulated post-apocalyptic science fantasy world. The visuals, while simple, look good and are in line with the bronze of the world, where the appeal of this game are the complex interactions between mechanics that the game accounts for, offering unparalleled depth and replayability. Customize your character with a wide array of mutations and cybernetics as you explore the world, encountering strange factions, ancient ruins, and emergent storytelling, since you can befriend bugs, clone yourself, become a door, and more, where if you're into this genre, you could easily spend hundreds of hours in this game, as could be the case for web fishing as well, since this is a quote-unquote game where technically you can go fishing, but the appeal of this is more of an online chat room where you can hang out with friends. Sure, the in-game fishing is nothing to write home about, but to have an alternative to these sweaty, competitive experiences to play with friends is neat, since you can just relax and chat. And while player population has dropped off as compared to its peak, I do still think that it is one of the more notable experiences of the year, and does show a craving for human connection in the world of games. But back to traditional video games, ANTONBLAST will be of note, a high-energy, destruction-fueled platformer where you play as Dynamite Anton on a mission to reclaim his stolen alcohol from Satan, destroying chunks of hell in the process. smash through levels with reckless abandon, and take down enemies in explosive fashion, with the gameplay loop of this resembling Wario Land, which was also seen in the 2023 hit Pizza Tower, so there is an appetite for this kind of game, which Nintendo is not fulfilling, so indie developers to the rescue once again, and you can revel in the chaos of this game as in Pacific Drive as well, a first-person driving survival game set in a surreal, anomaly-ridden version of the Pacific Northwest. This follows a lineage of road trip driving games, so your station wagon is your lifeline as you navigate treacherous roads, dodge environmental hazards, and upgrade your vehicle to withstand the ever-changing dangers of the wilderness. Key to all of these are the powerful orange storms which you need to outrun, with an intriguing central mystery as well. And while spooky, it is not exactly a horror game, with a very different kind of first-person game being VLADiK BRUTAL, an all-action first-person shooter with a throwback, almost Half-Life 2 look, but this leans very heavily on the minute-to-minute action and gunplay, which, as advertised, is pretty brutal. Set in a fictional dystopian country in East Europe, where a ruthless dictator has taken control, you must fight back against the system with overwhelming firepower. And while not the most impressive in terms of writing or plot, the action more than makes up for it, and impressively is the work of a solo developer and will be for fans of shooters. A very different kind of game is Depersonalization, a narrative-driven RPG with roguelike elements where your character's fate is shaped by choices, dice rolls, and branching storylines. There is some element of cosmic horror here, which is combined with an almost tabletop RPG style of character progression and turn-based RPG combat. Do be warned that the English localization can be a little rough, and I'm not sure if there are plans to refine it further, but it's definitely a cool, weird thing of note, as is Mouthwashing, an insanely popular, non-linear first-person narrative horror title set after a spaceship crashes and its crew are counting down the days until they die. Yes, it is a very bleak situation with no apparent hopes of rescue, so the combination of the hopelessness of the situation, as well as mounting isolation and their own psychological states, sets up the perfect environment to tell this tale. With the non-linear narrative jumping back and forth through time being a very interesting way to tell the story as well, and has a very effective visual style which adds to the game, where the same can be said for Felvidek, a turn-based RPG that takes place in an alternate history version of 15th century Slovakia. You play as Pavel, an alcoholic knight who must gather a party to stop those who oppose your kingdom. The art style certainly makes it stand out, as do the combat animations from first person, with interesting exploration through castles and dungeons and more, with secret doors and hidden passageways to find, and will be for JRPG fans. If you're looking for something a little more light-hearted yet still packed with mystery, it's time to put on your detective hat for Duck Detective: The Secret Salami, an adorable-looking noir-style detective game starring a duck, in which you have to interrogate quirky characters, gather clues, and try to solve the case of the missing Salami in a city full of anthropomorphic animals. With hilarious dialogue, charming hand-drawn visuals, and classic detective mechanics, this game is a delightful spin on the mystery genre, but do be warned that it is on the shorter side at about 2 hours, with the sequel, The Ghost of Glamping, being in development, so wishlist that title as well, with an entirely different kind of adventure being Dungeons of Hinterberg, an action-adventure RPG set in the beautiful alpine world filled with mystical dungeons, dangerous creatures, and deep exploration. In this world, apparently fighting monsters and exploring dungeons in the Alps is a slaycation, where our protagonist, burnt out from corporate life, decides to take up the sword instead. So it's kind of weird narratively, but that makes it unique. Combat is good and does have environmental puzzles thrown in for variety, along with characters to get to know and befriend in town, but for the most part has been likened to a Zelda game, and is good, with another sick-looking title being SKALD Against the Black Priory, a retro-style party-based CRPG that immerses players in a grim-dark fantasy world teeming with tragic heroes, violent deaths, and Lovecraftian horrors, drawing inspiration from classic role-playing games dating back to the Commodore 64. They went for that exact art style and color palette and have nailed it to a T. You lead a band of heroes through turn-based combat scenarios, being able to customize them by choosing from over a dozen different classes and varied backgrounds, and it's a great RPG. And while there probably are too many roguelites by now, a spell crafting action title of note is Magicraft, looking to be combining the Binding of Isaac with Noita to great effect. You are able to slot various spells and effects into your wand to create custom attacks, where the order in which you place them will affect the final spell. So experiment and play around with this to get the most overpowered build that you can think of. The constraint here would be mana, so you could have an extra powerful attack, but then you will need a lot more time before you can fire it again, combined with classic roguelite procedural generation as well as puzzle-like minigame rooms for variety, game-changing relics and more, and you have an excellent one of these that ranks among the greats. And speaking of which, Neva will probably end up on the list of the best indie games of all time as well, since this is an action-adventure platformer that weaves a poignant narrative around a young woman and a bond with a majestic wolf. Together, they embark on a journey through a decaying world, confronting challenges that test their resilience and unity. This is from the developer of Glee, an equally beautiful title with more of a puzzle platformer slant as compared to the combat focus here, both being gorgeous titles, with the bond between the two characters being central to the game and will stick to you long after you complete it, especially in terms of visuals, with a very different looking but equally impressive title being Dread Delusion, a first-person open-world RPG set in a surreal and atmospheric universe composed of floating islands and animatic landscapes. Of course, the throwback early 90s visuals of this game might not look like the most impressive at first glance, but as with titles like Felvidek and SKALD mentioned earlier, the developer went for it and nailed what they are going for. This is a truly open world title with multiple solutions and ways to complete the quests and objectives in the world, looking to capture a bit of that old school Elder Scrolls vibes, and is just a fascinating world to explore. It is not perfect, since elements like combat are perhaps tuned a little bit on the easy side in favour of exploration, and do also note that the start of the game can be rather slow, but push through and there is a gem of a game here. The same can be said for Rabbit and Steel, an action roguelite title that simulates MMO raid boss battles, where bunny girls must play their role and work together to take down the boss. In some ways, this is a stripped down and simplified version of MMORPGs, removing all the leveling up and fetch quest stuff to throw you right into the action, where you are avoiding damage cones and attempting to attack, buff and heal the other players. It is best with friends, but the single player mode is completely playable and tuned as such as well, where I had this as number 26 on my list of the best games of the year, so it is definitely a great game. The early access and bigger games section begins with Wildwoods, a co-op title where you play as cats defending a wooden wagon as it makes its way through a dangerous forest. Players must collect resources during the day for various upgrades and then to fend off enemies at night, focusing on teamwork and strategy. Variations like Forks in the Road provide some amount of replayability as players weigh up risk and reward, with challenging boss fights as well, with more content to be added, but it's pretty good so far, with another early access title of note being the not so indie Rotwood, since this is from Clay Entertainment, best known for Don't Starve, and is a beat-em-up dungeon crawler that is awesome. It does have co-op support as you team up with friends to battle through procedurally generated levels, teaming with enemies, traps and treasures. The game features fluid combat mechanics that allow for a variety of playstyles with an assortment of weapons and abilities to master. As is the Clay Entertainment signature, the art style here is gorgeous, with plenty of customization options for your characters in the form of equipment and abilities, having already released several free updates and is shaping up to be great, similar to TCG Card Shop Simulator, a game from a solo developer out of Malaysia, which you don't see every day, and is the game that I blame for the plague of first-person simulator titles flooding Steam, as other developers are trying to copy this to get some of that same success. This has an astounding 34,000 Steam reviews as of recording, and an overwhelmingly positive rating, translating to more than 1 million copies sold, in which you are running such a trading card shop, stocking and selling booster packs, hosting in-store events, and upgrading the shop itself, being great if you love simulation titles, but if you want more action, ATLYSS will be of note, a small open-world action RPG set in a vibrant fantasy world, with the furry anthropomorphic characters being a central focus, where people have clowned upon this game due to its sliders and character creation, but the core action here is pretty good and worth a play. It's a 3D action-adventure RPG with a little bit of a Souls-like feel to the combat, with a decent amount of content while still in early access, and only looks to get even better. Back to strategy titles with Norland, a medieval kingdom colony sim whose most direct comparison would be RimWorld, in which you are managing a noble family and their place in relation to their subjects. Family members are fully simulated, each with their own strengths, weaknesses and ambitions, having to work together to take charge of the city and kingdom amid the backdrop of class conflict, religious struggle and political treachery. Character traits determine personality, and you do end up with those emergent stories due to the simulation, like in RimWorld, where a character might betray another due to their own personal motivations. As an example, you will also need to satisfy the needs of the peasants, who are the backbone of the kingdom, being a deeply strategic title of note, with another strategy game which is less deep, being Yaoling Mythical Journey, a monster taming auto-battler life sim title inspired by Chinese mythology. You are making your way through a mystical world, having a battle the gym leaders kind of setup, but you do have a home base to build and upgrade, even being able to enlist the help of these creatures in their construction and building. Like another game later on in this list, combat differentiates itself from Pokemon in that it is an auto-battler in which you position your units in formation and hit the go button to watch the action unfold, having a bunch of life sim stuff like fishing and mining, and is chugging along quite nicely in early access. Speaking of city builders, we of course have to talk about Frostpunk 2, the sequel to one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful survival city builders from 2018, set in a frozen post-apocalyptic world. As the leader of a resource-starved city, players must make difficult decisions to ensure the survival of their people. This is a bigger, better, expanded version of the original, introducing new mechanics, challenges, and a deeper narrative, expanding upon the themes of the original of survival and morality, with plans of extensive post-launch support in the form of patches, free content updates, paid DLC and more, and will be for fans of the genre, with another huge sequel being Sons of the Forest, a first-person survival game with a horror vibe, being the follow-up to The Forest, where this game released out of early access in February 2024. If you're not familiar with the original, the main antagonists in this series are cannibals, which makes a return here, where enemies will actively assault your base, so constructing walls, defenses and traps are especially critical. The same core survival game experience is here, so you need to gather resources, build shelters and craft weapons, while venturing further and further out to advance the main story, and is one of the best survival games of all time, where 2024 really was the year of the survival game, or more specifically, the action survival title in the vein of Valheim, with Enshrouded being one of the most successful releases of the year. This is set in a fantasy world in which you play as the Flameborn, having to fight back a corrupting fog and to reclaim your kingdom. This has a behind-the-back third-person camera with the now iconic survival crafting gameplay loop of gathering resources, building a base, crafting weapons and equipment, and then venturing out to fight enemies to gain access to new resources and so on. The building system here is particularly impressive since you can, for example, excavate into a mountain or underground to build your base, with great action and combat as well, with up to 16 player support, and is fun with friends, with a whole bunch of content updates already, so I'll be interested to see where all of these games land in terms of how good they are when all is said and done. if Valheim is still the game to beat, or if there will be new contenders, with another early access title of interest being Fallen Aces, a first-person shooter that pays tribute to classic noir films and comic books, being of note since it is published by New Blood Interactive, who specializes in this genre of game. Set in the crime-ridden Switchblade City, the Aces, which are the guardians of the city, are being taken out one by one, and you play as a man determined to get to the bottom of it all, with it having a great visual style and awesome action, giving you options to go loud or stealthy in your approach, with it having 1 out of 3 planned episodes so far, but it is already winning over hearts and minds. A very different kind of game is Shapez 2, a factory builder title similar to Factorio that requires you to construct intricate production lines to create and manipulate various shapes. This is the sequel to the much more minimalist Shapez, which released on Steam in 2020, but was previously a .io game which you can still play in browser, with this sequel taking things into 3D for even more complex production lines. Interestingly, the game is not focused on resource management, instead giving you infinite resources and infinite space to build your factory how you see fit, where the complexity of the shapes required really does ramp up quite significantly, but if optimization is your jam, this will be of interest. But if you want more action, let's go back to Selaco, a first-person shooter that draws inspiration from classic titles like Doom and Quake, running on the GZ Doom engine, which gives it a more modern presentation. Set in a dystopian future, you play as Dawn, a former security captain of Selaco, a massive underground facility where she is digging into the history of the facility, but just as she is about to uncover an unsettling truth, the facility comes under attack and she must pick up her weapons to fight off the enemies. The action and shooting in this game is top-notch, giving you access to a variety of weapons including unconventional grenades, with the advanced AI of the enemy units being of note since they can coordinate, flank and react dynamically to your actions, providing a challenging experience with more to be added. But going back to turn-based titles, SteamWorld Heist II is also of note, the sequel to a beloved but underrated title in the SteamWorld franchise. The original SteamWorld Heist was set in space on spaceships, technically being a turn-based tactics title but as a side-scroller in which you had to manually aim your shots and to use physics and ricochets to your advantage, with all of these returning in the sequel, but this time on more traditional seafaring vessels. It of course has new characters, weapons and upgrades, also adding in a new real-time naval combat system, which seems to be going against its core DNA, but I cannot fault them for trying something new, and it's a great strategic title. And speaking of which, the survival city builder Cataclysmo is of note, one that resembles games like They Are Billions, but allows you to construct your fortress brick by brick, so a more micro-scale, granular version of games in this subgenre. You are leading your troops to fight back against the creatures of the mist, pushing back the darkness and to reclaim land that was once yours. The physics of the construction is the most interesting part, since you need to be concerned about structural integrity and load-bearing columns, having to know which parts to defend, otherwise leaving it exposed might just cause entire parts of the fortress to collapse when it comes under attack. I like the art style as well and is good, but might need a little tweaking and rebalancing as early access games tend to be, with another such title being Realm of Ink, an action roguelite title that resembles Hades but with a Chinese calligraphy inspired art style and Chinese mythology inspired theme. You play as Red, a character in a book who realizes that she is a character and now wants to fight back against her fate, having an interesting number of different forms, as well as all the roguelite bells and whistles of procedural generation and upgrade systems. Do note that for some reason, this game was delisted from Steam in January 2025, with no reason to date as to why this was the case, but it should be temporary, so check back in to see if it is reinstated, since it's a good game with a great look. And speaking of which, we also had the return of Metal Slug in 2024, but not in the way you might expect, since instead of a run-and-gun action platformer, Metal Slug Tactics is now a roguelite turn-based tactics game. Sure, you have returning characters, enemies and weapons like Marco and the Prisoner of War, with some of the mechanics being cleverly translated into a tactical game. For example, instead of hiding behind cover to take potshots at enemies, your character gains increased dodge if they maximize their movement, so essentially turn-based run and gun, which gives it a very different feel from other games in this genre. Also of note are combo attacks, where all characters in range of the enemy will fire and will be critical to master if you want to beat the game. I love the pixel art here, and it is a very well made title, even if hardcore fans just want another run and gun platformer, with another developer making a similar kind of shift in Windblown, an action roguelite title that comes to us from the developer of Dead Cells. Only instead of being a platformer, this is a 3/4 view action title instead. The main point that the developers want to bring across is that the action is lightning fast, and I concur, in which you play as a leaper, a warrior fighting to save your town from the deadly vortex and the minions that are coming from it. Set on floating islands in the sky, the game has an interesting setting and a great look, and was designed from the ground up as a roguelite, meaning that the developer did work in depth to the gameplay loop. You will be able to absorb the memories of fallen warriors to unlock special powers and gear, gaining access to new combinations of weapons and synergies, along with passive gifts, trinkets and more for the ideal roguelite experience. This already has 6,500 Steam reviews in a very short period of time and only looks to get better, so I would consider this to be a successful pivot. However, for a different take on a familiar genre, you should look at Abiotic Factor, a first-person survival crafting title but with a twist, since it is not set in some forest or on an island with dinosaurs, rather having a setting similar to the Black Mesa facility in Half-Life 1 instead. Something has gone horribly wrong and monsters are running amok in the facility, and you play as not the main Gordon Freeman-like character, but rather a random scientist with no special abilities or plot armor. You have to scavenge for resources, not by punching trees, but by breaking down wooden crates left around, being a very interesting and alternative take on the survival game genre, which no other game has done before, which makes it unique. The core gameplay loop is still there, centered around crafting better equipment and gear so that you can explore new areas, with a fantastically done throwback look as well, and is chugging along nicely in early access, as is the case with Manor Lords as well, a medieval city building and strategy game that was at one point in time among the top 5 most wishlisted games on Steam, which immediately translated into sales momentum, selling over 2.5 million copies as of January 2025. This offers a realistic portrayal of feudal life, where as a lord, you design and manage your settlement, overseeing everything from resource gathering to military campaigns, with an organic city building mechanic which allows for freeform construction without grid constraints. Detailed economic and social systems add depth to the management aspects, while large-scale tactical battles provide strategic challenges, since the troops that you rally to your banner comprise of farmers, blacksmiths, and more, meaning that war is extra costly and has an economic impact for every foot soldier killed. Being a deeply strategic title that has impressed so far, with an all-action title with a famous IP being BlazBlue Entropy Effect, a roguelite platformer spin-off of the fighting game franchise, where Arc System Works handed the IP over to a Chinese developer, and they have knocked it out of the park with this game. This is a very flashy, almost anime-inspired action title, with screen-filling attacks and special effects, along with the pure speed of the action, which makes it very impressive. Characters can inherit skills from each other, which gives you an incentive to at least try all the characters, and might prove to be a lucrative model for other big-name developers to license off the IP to make spin-offs. But going back to survival crafting titles, the 1.0 release of V Rising is of note, a vampire-themed one of these that looks and plays like a Diablo game in combat, but hides a very involved base and castle building element. Newly awakened from centuries of slumber, your character is initially weak and has to regain their strength before turning their attention to reclaiming lands that were once theirs. Crafting is central to this game, allowing you to construct and customize your fortress while exploring a vast gothic world filled with dangers and secrets, with the action RPG combat being dynamic, giving you access to a variety of weapons and vampiric abilities, and was so successful as to attract the attention of Konami, releasing a Castlevania-themed crossover DLC, with player population still holding up post-launch, but is probably best in an instance with your own friends. As of recording, Ender Magnolia Bloom in the Mist has officially been released and is among the best games of 2025 so far, which was kind of obvious even back in 2024, where this Metroidvania followed a similar model to their previous game, Ender Lily's Quietus of the Nights. This is a sequel set years after the events of the first game, also featuring indirect combat in the form of homunculi who fight on your behalf, and conveniently acts as the Metroidvania-style traversal ability unlocked as well, with another early access release of note being Fields of Mystria. Perhaps the most successful farming game to come along after Stardew Valley, featuring many of the same elements as the all-time great, from cultivating crops, raising animals, and engaging with a diverse cast of townsfolk, each with their own stories and personalities. The game offers a rich crafting experience, allowing you to customize your farm and home to your liking. Seasonal festivals, fishing, mining, and even romance options adds depth to the gameplay, ensuring that there's always something to do, with various quality of life improvements that seem minor but are nice to have, like the ability to save during the day, where if you love the genre like me, and even if you have hundreds of hours in Stardew Valley, this will be worth a play, with the game of the year in terms of mainstream appeal being Pal World. Another entry in the action survival crafting sandbox space, but has the unique twist of introducing pals or monsters to capture, seeming obvious in hindsight since it offers that much more mature Pokemon game for adults rather than one which is targeted at kids. Yes, that means exploring the idea of being able to hunt down and kill pals, to enslave them to work in your factory, to shoot them with guns, or to give them guns so that they can shoot at your enemies, where this game blew up in January 2024, to the extent that it even got the attention of Nintendo, who, in a very Nintendo-like fashion, decided to sue them. Putting the drama aside, this is a fun survival crafting title, with the catch-em-all aspect of the pals adding to the appeal, as well as a very involved base building element that allows you to use said pals to help in the gathering and processing of resources, where the developer has been steadily adding more content to the game and is getting even better, where the same can be said for Hades 2 as well, the sequel to my favourite roguelite of all time, set after the events of the first game, although no prior knowledge is required. This is being made by Supergiant Games, perhaps the most consistent indie developer since all of their games are awesome, with this not being an exception, telling the tale of Melinoi, daughter of Hades, the great god of the underworld, as she seeks to stop the Titan of Time, Kronos, and has some of the best combat that you will come across. As compared to the early access of the first game, they did do away with the timer on the start screen counting down to the next update, which was a feature that I loved since it kept early access developers accountable, but Supergiant are taking their time with this game, releasing one major update since the early access launch in May 2024 so far, but it's a substantial amount of content, already on par with the original game and looks to be bigger and better, and this is for sure a Game of the Year contender whenever it releases, which is exactly the case with Satisfactory, a first-person factory building game in the vein of Factorial, and as of recording, has actually surpassed it in terms of the number of Steam reviews, so it might have already sold more copies. This released in 1.0 after something like 5 years in early access, and is probably the most complex factory builder title out there, allowing you to build huge, sprawling, multi-level production lines, including trains and other transportation networks, to extract and process resources to build bigger and better machines to get better resources and so on, being another multi-100-hour title if this is your jam, where I could easily see this being supported for years to come. This is the midway point of the video, and with too many games, I cannot link all of them due to character limits in the description, so I've made a PDF which you can grab below as a useful resource. Hidden gems of 2024 are indie games outside of the mainstream, having interesting ideas but might be a little flawed, but hey, that's why I love them, imperfections and all. So let's begin with Gestalt, Steam and Cinder, one of the prettiest pixel art titles to come along, which was stuck in development hell for quite a while, finally making it out the door, but you can feel the effect of the long development cycle in the design of the game. Visually, this is an 11 out of 10, having gorgeous animations and art, with combat being pretty decent as well, mixing melee and ranged weapons. There are RPG-like progression systems, similar to a Castlevania game with stats and a skill tree, but the writing and pacing of this game feels off, especially towards the end, and is fairly linear by Metroidvania standards. Similarly, another game which is all art style is #Blood, which is why I wanted to give it a mention, looking like something you would find on Cartoon Network, only a lot bloodier than you might expect. Being a vampire hunting action-adventure title set against the backdrop of a high school, it looks gorgeous, but unfortunately, combat isn't the best and can be a bit repetitive, which I guess shows their inexperience as a game developer, since this team was previously making animations only, so a great first attempt, and they did even release a free content update with werewolves, so it's worth checking out. Wanna get weird? Here's a strange little title that serves more as a bookmark for myself on how strange and weird indie games can get, since in Arctic Eggs you are cooking food for NPCs in what seems like some sort of frozen cyberpunk-ish setting, having to wrangle with the physics. And of course, it is not just limited to frying eggs, but also bacon, cigarettes, bullets and cockroaches as well, self-describing as the getting over it of cooking games, and is just a cool weird thing, with developer The Water Museum appearing to be working on more weird titles as well. A couple of you mentioned the conspicuous absence of Oblivion Override in the Best Roguelite of the Year video, and to that I say fair enough, since this roguelite platformer where you play as a ninja killer bot in the post-apocalypse is pretty good. It has fantastic action and absolutely gorgeous art, with weapon variety and progression systems as well. However, its English language localization leaves much to be desired, even if you can kind of get the gist of what they are talking about, so some rough edges to send off for sure, but otherwise, it's a good one of these that will be of interest to fans of the genre. It is pretty risky to do a 3D action-adventure platformer, especially in 2024, since there is the possibility that it turns out like a Kimbot, a great game which is criminally overlooked, that, if made by a larger team, might spell certain doom for them, but hopefully this is not the end of the story for developer Evil Raptor. This is from the people that made Pumpkin Jack, a medieval-style action title with a spooky theme that was well received, where in this project, the developers opted for a Ratchet & Clank style of experience instead. Our outlaw robot and a drone buddy have to blast their way through other robots in order to save the universe from impending doom, having action-packed combat, but is a little bit on the easier side, and did appear to have optimization issues with how the game ran, and difficulty attaining 60 FPS, but still, games like this are rare these days, so check it out if interested. If you love tycoon games, I would highly recommend checking out Dungeon Tycoon as well, one in which you're building your very own dungeon, but not for the reasons you might think. You see, rather than trying to protect your treasure from greedy heroes, you are trying to attract these heroes instead, still summoning monsters, building traps and designing the layout, but not just to simply kill them, no, but rather ensure that they do not get killed and don't go home empty-handed so that they will come visit again. Yes, this is a full-on tourist business with a dungeon theme, instead of the more sinister overtones of other games in this space, with a cool art style and is pretty neat. Another management title but with a slightly different twist is My Lovely Empress, coming to us from the developer of My Lovely Daughter and My Lovely Wife, and is their most ambitious title to date. The first two games were more management sim-like in the vein of the Princess Maker games, but much more dark of course, with the whole human sacrifice thing and so on, where they have expanded upon the empire management aspect in this game. You play as the ruler of the realm, whose empress has died, now having to rule and navigate the complexities of running an empire by managing relationships with neighbouring rulers and keeping the peace between various internal factions so that your people can prosper, which then gives you the option to harvest their souls to resurrect your beloved. If that isn't dark and twisted, I don't know what is, where you have the ability to summon Yao Guai or demons to help along the way. These powerful creatures have abilities that can help you deal with, let's say, problems in the Empire, but do thirst for human souls, where these demons can be both powerful allies or precious sacrifices as well. It does have a gorgeous art style and an impressive theme, but might fall a bit short if you were expecting a deep strategy title like Crusader Kings or something, so this is definitely not that, but it's still worth a look. The definition of a hidden gem is Berserk Boy, since this pixel art action platformer with some Mega Man Zero inspiration is good and looks beautiful even if the formula has been done before and isn't doing anything too crazy. Our hero, the titular Berserk Boy, has a variety of elemental forms which can be used in combat as well as in platforming, giving him access to special abilities, and has to use these to deal with the evil Dr. Genos and his army of dark energy minions. You will be switching forms and bouncing all over the place as you jump from enemy to enemy, having an arcadey and high score chasing feel to the combat with a meter as well, so if you really wanted to, you could try to get the high score, but if you just want to play it casually, that is an option as well and is a great one of these. One of the more unique titles to come along is this game trying to kill me? A title that does look like the 2021 mega hit Inscription, but with a slightly different game design. It is also set in a creepy old shack in the woods where you're told to play through this computer game in exchange for your freedom. But then things start to get weird, since what is in the game manifests itself in the real world and the actions that you take in the shack affects what is happening in the game as well. The characters in this game are pretty freaky, especially in how they move and enter the shack, being an interesting blend of puzzle game with some horror overtones, although I wouldn't exactly consider this to be a horror game, and it's a well-made, if short, puzzle experience. We had our share of Vampire Survivors style titles in 2024 as well, and while most of them were a dime a dozen, a game with a twist is Karate Survivor. For one, this is a melee combat focused entry in which you are using punches and kicks to defeat enemies. It is a throwback to the action movies of the 80s that star Jackie Chan in particular, with the main character having a visual resemblance to him as well, where in addition to martial arts, you need to use the environment and improvise weapons as well. These weapons include everything from plastic flamingos to mop handles, a child's toy hammer, plates, bottles, and more, being able to punch vending machines or to bring down scaffolding for a variety of environmental interactions. Of course, there are a number of upgrades, both in-run and permanent, which improve all aspects of the game, from more damaging attacks to larger pickup ranges, so at its core, it is still one of these, but it feels different enough to be of note, with level variety and bosses as well to keep things interesting. An awesome strategy symbol builder title is Cat God Wrench, one that follows in the footsteps of games like Luck Be a Landlord, but with a much less overt gambling theme, replacing the slot machine with a cute and cozy animal wrench. The animals generate currency needed to pay tribute to the cat god, and of course do combo in interesting ways. There are a variety of cat gods, each with unique traits, along with different families of animals, as well as relics that might just make you change your strategy for the run, along with multiple difficulty levels, so there's plenty of replayability here, along with an adorable art style, so if you enjoy titles like Balatro and like to see numbers go up, this will be the game for you. An adorable looking job simulator title is Lost But Found, putting you in charge of the lost and found department at an airport, having to sort out and quickly find the items to reunite them with their rightful owners. The art style is absolutely adorable, but this is not just a simple hidden object game, since it layers on job simulation where you are rewarded the more quickly you return items, which can then be used to purchase more items to make you better at your job. Or you could keep the items for yourself and sell it on the black market, so it's a little bit like Papers, Please, with a content roadmap being announced with more features to come, being a small, cheap title that is pretty good. Speaking of smaller games, I want to give a very special mention to King of the Bridge as well, a variant on chess where you play against a bridge troll instead. However, of course this is not just chess, since the troll has its own rules in the form of an entire rulebook, so you need to learn and understand this new version of chess so that you do not break the rules. On the flip side, if your opponent cheats and does not act according to the rulebook, you can call him out on that, which then allows you to cheat on your next move. Once you get the hang of the rules, it will be possible to beat the troll, but then there are multiple endings to figure out and achievements to go along with that, and it's also another relatively low-cost title, so if you love chess, do give this a go. One of the best games of the year is Lone Slewer, a first-person platformer with a climb anything mechanic in which you play as an android guided by a visual glitch in your system to explore a gigantic structure. This is from a first-person perspective, in which you are using your dual picks to climb, but at the same time have to carefully make your way across wire-thin beams as well as slide on sloped surfaces until you can make the next jump to the next surface. The throwback visuals are very well done and thus add to its foreboding atmosphere, and while aspects of this are meant for speed running, playing through it as a normal person is just as fun, especially if you love exploration in games. An unfortunate fact about the Hidden Gems list is that puzzle games tend to end up here, which is a shame since their quality has been improving over the past couple of years, with an excellent example of which being Kato Buttered Cat. This is a puzzle platformer that explores the paradox of cats always landing on their feet and buttered toast always landing butter side down. So what happens when you strap the two together? Well, the answer is that this cat-toast combination can essentially fly, using this to your advantage to solve the puzzles, but you're also able to detach the two and have to control cat and toast separately in order to solve some puzzles. There is gameplay variety in the form of various minigames like Snake and a runner type 3D one, along with plenty of secrets to uncover within the levels themselves, and is a must-get for puzzle game fans. We also had the 1.0 release of Frontier Hunter Urza's Wheel of Fortune, an anime-inspired title that is the follow-up to the roguelite platformer Tower Hunter Urza's Trial, but this time reimagined as a full-on Metroidvania instead. The main character, Urza, has successfully managed to earn her hunter's license and has become one of the rising stars in the Imperial Force, and now, under the instruction of the Emperor, she leads a new exploration team to scout new lands, battle monsters, and uncover the mysteries of the world. What is interesting about this game is the setting, since it mixes sci-fi and fantasy, having airships and guns alongside giant monsters, serpents and werewolves, which does lead to quite the amount of variety when it comes to not only enemies and bosses, but also level design and locations. Adding to that is the ability to seamlessly swap between the three characters in your party, whose attacks and abilities can be comboed together, along with RPG-like progression with stats and equipment, and you have the foundation for a solid title. It did remind me of Bloodstained Ritual of the Night as well, but a little less cohesive overall, but still, it's a good game worth a play. Remember when I talked about puzzle games being in the Hidden Gems list? That is the exact scenario here with Owls of Sea and Sky, an open-world Sokoban or block-pushing puzzle game, which admittedly is an old-school kind of title going back to games like Chip's Challenge, but the developers here have expanded it out into an open-world structure with plenty of secrets to uncover. I mentioned in last year's Game of the Year video that for the most part, level-based puzzle games are dead, now having found their home on mobile along with all the exploitative monetization practices there, So for a premium title on Steam, developers must do much more, usually taking the form of secrets and meta puzzles, which has been accomplished here. You are exploring the various islands in the archipelago, each filled with their own unique gimmicks to master, which then have to be put together as a whole if you want to 100% the game. Generally, you explore on one island until you feel like you're stuck, but then the open world structure allows you to go off and explore another, perhaps gaining a new ability that might help, but as a result, the puzzle aspect of this puzzle game might not be as pure as, say, Pack-a-Rat Down the Bun Burrows, but still, it's a must-get for fans of the genre. Ever so often, we get titles which I would describe as flow-state games, having such smooth action that one move feeds into the next, and when you really do get in the zone, the combat in Shady Night is truly one of the best. This is a first-person melee slasher in which you have to defeat all enemies in a level, but have to do so with style, chaining together your grappling hook chain dagger, sword slashes, arrow shots, slides, kicks and more as you attempt to get the SSS rank in each level. In many ways, this does resemble the game flow of something like Neon White, only stripping out the anime story bits in favour of non-stop action, having a cool visual style as well, and is very underrated. Speaking of underrated, one of the cleverest and most beautiful titles of the year is Arco, a pixel art tactics title that follows 4 characters and 3 intertwining stories, being self-described as a Mesoamerican fantasy RPG where the 4 indigenous heroes battle monstrous creatures, rival nations, and greedy colonizers. But beware, since all roads in Arco lead to revenge. Getting the obvious out of the way, this is one of the prettiest pixel art titles ever, with intricately detailed environments and locations, contrasted with the more minimalist look of the characters and enemies, where it has a very interesting combat system which may be to its detriment. In theory, this game is turn-based, where combat does pause, which allows you to queue up your next command, whether it be to attack or move, which then resolves simultaneously with your enemies, so you need to lead your shots or to anticipate where enemies are going to move to if you wanted to, say, throw a stick of dynamite on the ground. As such, it does take a while to get used to and can be frustrating when you miss, but I do wonder how this would have fared if they went with a more traditional turn-based tactics combat system, but still, it's a cool, weird thing that is worthy of the title of Hidden Gem. Swinging back to an all-action title in Kill Knight, which is more similar to Shady Night mentioned earlier, only this time instead of first person, this has a more classic 3/4 view camera and is a twin-stick shooter instead. You play as a loyal knight who was betrayed and banished to the abyss, now taking the form of a desecrated corpse within a reanimated suit of armor as you take your revenge and have to kill the last angel. So how metal is that? While it looks like a Vampire Survivors inspired title with the swarms of enemies that the game throws at you, this is not a roguelite, where you are essentially starting from zero every time you play, but do get equipment unlocks which vary up the gameplay. The 5 levels here are distinct enough and have plenty of challenge, with the intense 3 to 8 minutes required per level, making this perfect for those shorter gaming sessions, but it's a title that I wholeheartedly recommend. If you love Metroidvanias, you might want to take a look at Bow Path of the Teal Lotus, a title that draws upon Japanese mythology for inspiration, specifically in terms of art and enemy designs. You play as a fox celestial blossom, wielding a legendary bow staff, embarking on a mystical journey to fulfill an ancient prophecy. The art style is a highlight, along with the yokai designs, with gameplay, of course, borrowing elements from Hollow Knight and Ori and the Blind Forest, which are fantastic inspirations. It does have an increased focus on aerial combat, so more often than not, you'll find yourself off your feet and up in the air, which feels alright in practice, but might take a while to get used to, especially when you are launching yourself from one lantern to the next. And while it doesn't reinvent the wheel, this is a very well made one of these that is going under the radar, and in a year that was pretty scarce with Metroidvania releases, this is a good one of these to keep you up to date. Old school Zelda-style 3/4 view action-adventure titles are also getting quite rare these days, where if you're interested in games like this, I would recommend Ugu and the Secret Forest. This game released out of early access and might have gotten overlooked because of that, where you play as a baby platypus looking character going on an adventure in this charming hand-drawn world. It has a cast of unique and interesting characters, along with side activities like fishing, as well as puzzles and secrets to uncover, which complements the combat. The powers of the Great One have been shattered and scattered to the winds, where you must gather these pieces but have to face off against mighty bosses that are trying to claim it for themselves. But generally, it's on the more light-hearted end of things with how it plays and especially how it looks. If you're trying to 100% the game, parts of it can be frustrating, so you might want to use a guide, but other than that, it's a wonderful title that is very well made, and I'm interested to see what's next from this developer. Here's a roguelike card game that absolutely got me this year in Dice and Fold, a game which combines both dice and cards instead of one or the other, framed as a dungeon crawler where your party of heroes descends ever deeper to take on powerful bosses. You start off a run by choosing a hero, but can recruit allies along the way, having to use their complementary abilities if you want to succeed, where healing in particular is very important. You are rolling dice and slotting them into your cards to activate abilities, with special dice as well as some strategy in the form of holding onto dice or to use them to generate extra gold for upgrades. In roguelite fashion, there are trinkets to collect, which confer powerful abilities, and in a clever bit of game design, it is rather beatable on lower difficulty levels, which makes you want to push your luck to try it at harder difficulties, which is part of the genius of this game. It was a bit of a strange year for Devolver since they did not have any mega hits in 2024, but nonetheless did release great games as always, with the first-person shooter Kicker Combo Angerfoot being of note here. This is from developer Free Lives, who love their variety, having made games in different genres every time they make a new game, so for an FPS to feel this good is of note as well. In some ways, this is Hotline Miami-like, where you are kicking down doors and smoking bad guys, having some trial and error but instant reset element to the flow of the game as well. There is variety in weapons as well as the sneakers that you wear, which grant different abilities, along with a thumping soundtrack, which is good, but it might grate on you after a while, but it is still a fun title worth a play. One of the best games of 2024 is Crypt Custodian, in which you play as a cat in the afterlife, having been sentenced to be its janitor forever, where you can make friends with the other lonely spirits on your way to battle bosses and explore. While this is from a 3/4 view perspective, you can actually jump in this game, so while I'm usually a stickler for this, I would say that this is a Metroidvania, since it does have movement-focused abilities and unlocks that allow you to get to new areas, which, along with satisfying combat, makes this a no-brainer. With developer Carl Thompson looking to find his groove with every successive game of his getting better and better, so let's see what's next from him. The best games begins with Touhou Hero of Ice Fairy, a 2D bullet hell boss rush platformer that is quite the challenge. If you're not familiar, the Touhou project is pretty much an open source IP where fans are free to use the characters and setting, and have made animations, short stories, light novels, music, and of course, video games as well, best known for the bullet hell shoot-em-up titles of the mainline Touhou games. But developers have cleverly adapted that concept into all sorts of other genres, like in this case, where you have to dodge and shoot at bosses, strategically choosing when to use spell cards, and has a fantastic look as well. One of the slickest games of the year is Echo Point Nova, coming to us from the developer of Severed Steel, which is also worth a play, but as compared to the more enclosed environments of that game, this title is set in an open world in which you are free to explore, zipping around floating islands in the sky as you try to accomplish various objectives. You play as an explorer who has crash landed on a mysterious planet dominated by a ruthless mercenary force who is exploiting ancient technology to craft devastating weapons, with your grand goal of dismantling their operations, but in open world fashion, you are free to explore at your own pace in any direction that you choose. The open world design of this game is the most impressive thing about it, since it is truly expansive, and with the help of your trusty grappling hook and hoverboard, you can move around at high speeds. In fact, this has been described as Doom meets Titanfall meets Tony Hawk, which is high praise, and impressively, the game manages to deliver on the action. On top of enemy variety, there are also titanic bosses to battle, along with secrets, hidden weapons, character enhancements, and much more, where in addition to single player, it also supports 4-player co-op and really is a must-play if you love shooters. It is not easy to do comedy in games since the all-important element of timing might become an issue when you are dependent on player input, but yet, thank goodness You're Here manages to pull it off, a narrative adventure platformer with an adorable look. You play as a travelling salesman who visits a very British town, and with a couple of hours to spare before your next meeting, opt to help the locals with their various requests. But your character is absolutely tiny as compared to the other characters, which does lead to funny situations. The voice acting, art and animation is top notch in this game, and while it isn't very long in duration, the jokes and humour more than makes up for that and will put a smile on your face. A title that kind of came out of nowhere is Luma Island, a sandbox action-adventure crafting title that has impressed me, in which you start off with your caravan and can eventually upgrade it into a manor. You are exploring this new island, adventuring in caves, solving puzzles and helping the locals, and have a choice of 7 professions to master, from blacksmith to fisherman and even archaeologist, each with its own path and variety of tasks. The crafting gameplay loop is present, in which you upgrade your tools to be able to gather even better materials as the progression, with fetch quest style objectives to keep you trucking along. There are also Luma, which are little pets which you can get to help you out, and while you can do activities like farming, it is not so much a farming sim, also having streamlined systems like no energy meter or the need to sleep. As such, it can become a little bit grindy, but with co-op support, it's a fantastic title to spend hours in with friends or family, keeping you just engaged enough until you get that next objective, all wrapped up with a wonderful, pleasing art style. Hot off the presses is the news that developer Game River has ended their partnership with Paradox, making Mechabellum technically indie once again. A fantastic looking auto-battler title that allows you to assemble a massive mechanized army, hit the go button and watch them slam into enemy forces. You are able to customize your units and abilities, and in the initial phase, can strategically plan where to place them before the start of the battle, but once that begins, you don't have direct control of your units anymore. However, you can use special abilities like calling in an airstrike to turn the tides of battle, but your opponent will be looking to do the same, where it is an actual human player on the other end, so things can get sweaty, with some reports of toxicity in chat, but you can probably just ignore that. There is a single player mode where you can play against AI if you want to completely avoid that, but it's a gorgeous and strategic title worth a look. It was somewhat of a miracle that Secrets of Grandia released out of early access earlier this year, since it spent like 9 years in development, where I have to commend the developers for at least being consistent in their efforts, where slow and steady over the long haul and not quitting has made this into quite the product. This is an action-adventure RPG with a 16-bit pixel art look, having that very classic fantasy setting of dragons, slimes, mimics and more as you venture into dungeons and battle enemies and bosses. In addition to combat, there are also a variety of side activities like your own home to customize, fishing, crafting, raising pets and a variety of mini-games, giving you something else to do before you delve into the next dungeon. It does also have an arcade mode in addition to the story mode, which has more of a roguelike structure with the town as the main hub area for progression, also having co-op support for up to 4 players. Story really isn't the main draw here, but if you're looking for an experience similar to cross-code or old-school Zelda games, then this might be of note. Another release out of early access is Peglin, the pachinko roguelite RPG in which you play as a goblin fighting its way through the forest in order to get to the heart of the dragon's lair to take back all the gold that they have stolen from your fellow Peglins and to teach them a lesson. This is a run-based title in which you are getting and upgrading your orbs to launch onto the board, where as they hit the various pegs will accumulate damage, which is then used to attack enemies. There's a huge variety in the types of orbs available, from special effects like lightning or extra critical damage, along with game-changing relics which will affect your build for the run. The satisfaction of watching the ball bounce around and possibly activating special abilities like multi-ball is as fun as ever, so add on the randomized orbs that you get, shops for upgrades and random events, as well as the combat and even a variety of playable characters, and you have the recipe for a very successful title. I'm not the deepest into the Souls-like genre, but do appreciate them for what they are, challenging titles that encourage players not to give up, to try again and again and again, until they learn the attack patterns and master the combat, which was why Another Crab's Treasure stood out, being, obviously, much more visually vibrant as compared to the grim-dark gothic inspiration of other games in this space. You play as a hermit crab whose shell has been repossessed, now having to adventure across the undersea kingdom on a treasure hunt so that he can buy it back. I love how the enemies and bosses are a variety of sea creatures and wield weapons like discarded plastic forks and chopsticks, with the social media game of their community manager being excellent, and hey, they are welcoming to new players as well, giving you a gun if you're frustrated with a particular boss, so extra points for that. I'm not sure where to place this title since Buckshot Roulette defies genres, being a competitive title that has you and your opponent taking turns to fire a shotgun either at yourself or at the other player, where it may or may not be loaded and you end up testing your luck. By default, you're playing against the CPU-controlled dealer, although they did add multiplayer support as well, where you do have items to help, such as handcuffs, which makes the other player skip a turn and so on. The art style makes it stand out as well, and given that it has a relatively low price, has managed to sell a stupid number of copies, also having a very interesting launch strategy since there is a free version of this on itch.io, with the Steam release having more content, but the itch version is fully playable and might be something to consider if you're an indie developer. Developer Pastek Games has been crushing it, going from success to success, such as in the case of Raven's Watch, an action roguelite with a dark fairy tale theme, which is similar in some ways to their previous game, Curse of the Dead Gods. However, instead of a single character, you have a variety of dark and twisted versions of beloved characters to choose from, such as Little Red Riding Hood, who is also a werewolf, or Aladdin, whose beloved princess got stuck in a lamp. There are 9 playable characters here, which is a lot of variety, along with some great combat, beautiful art, and even 4-player co-op, and is among the best games in the roguelite space. Like Secrets of Grandia mentioned earlier, we have 1.0 releases which seem like they had been in early access for forever, another example of which is Nova Drift, an arena action roguelike title with a sci-fi theme. This takes inspiration from the arcade space combat shooters of old, like really old, think Asteroids or Space Invaders, and gives it modern sheen and polish, also adding roguelite style randomness in enemies and bosses that you face, but also the upgrades and weapons that you get access to. There are 3 main components here in the weapon, shield and body gear, which you're able to mix and match to create powerful builds. There are mines, lasers, swords, a ramming build, one where you spawn smaller constructs to attack your enemies for you, the ability to teleport, create a shield, use fire, have your projectiles wrap around the screen, and so much more, having endless possible combinations, which is the fun of this game. You are always given something new to try and thus have multiple game modes, including Endless, which allows you to continue to play after you beat a run, Draft Mode, which gives you a pre-constructed build to play with, and Wild Metamorphosis mode, which adds powerful mods into the mix, offering an insane amount of replayability and is a must-get for fans of the genre. If you love strategy and tactical titles, I would highly recommend that you look at Shogun Showdown, a side-scrolling turn-based title in which you control a single character that has to face off against multiple enemies. There's only a single plane of movement here, but positioning is critical since you have attacks and abilities that will push and pull enemies or make you backstab or to swap places with enemy characters, which is critical since this can result in them attacking each other, which you know since their intentions are made clear, which is similar to how Into the Breach did it. There are upgrades for your attacks and unlocks after every run, with new characters to play as, new abilities and more, all with a fantastic pixel art look, and again, is one of the best tactical roguelites to come along. An all-action first-person shooter is Mullet Mad Jack, where you have to kill an enemy every 10 seconds or your life will end. The reason behind this is that the game is set in a cyberpunk future where humans and the internet have merged and you need a dopamine hit, with our hero having to slaughter the Roll Billionaires in order to rescue the world's most popular influencer. The time limit forces the action, so you are forced to engage with the enemy, although you can turn that off for a more classic FPS experience, but by default, this is a blisteringly fast title due to the combination of gunplay, melee attacks, and also movement options like kicks and slides where you get upgrades after every level to become even more powerful. It is inspired by classic anime and has that Akira slide thing but with a car, where this also factors into the story campaign and changes up the gameplay, but does have a roguelite mode which has been compared to Post-Void and is pretty replayable as well. They just announced a crossover update with Ultra Kill, which is perhaps the best indie first-person shooter, so that's a ringing endorsement from that team, so take their word for it. An amazing title that was going under the radar for a little while is Jova Forsaken Kin, but people are beginning to catch on and it is seeing a surge in popularity. This is an action-adventure RPG set in a world inspired by Celtic mythology where you play as a nobody who has to make your own path in the world. It has an open world structure, so you are free to explore and will quickly die if you end up somewhere you are under-leveled for, where your choices and actions will shape the environment. A society has discovered the power of a dead empire where they can capture and harness the spirits that govern nature, which naturally leads to anger from the remaining spirits, and it is against this backdrop that two rival factions have emerged and you can choose which to join. For the most part, this is action-adventure RPG stuff, so combat as well as equipment and loot, but does have gathering resources, a crafting system and trading of equipment. This is from a small German team, which is of note since this game has been compared to the Gothic series of RPG made by German developer Piranha Bytes, so I'm guessing that these developers played a lot of those games in their youth and have essentially made a spiritual successor while still making it their own, and of course, me being me, the pixel art definitely helps in its presentation. I've had my eye on this title for a little while and was very happy with the final product since Mini Shoot Adventures is structured like an action-adventure old-school Zelda title but combines that with bullet hell combat and some Metroidvania inspiration in terms of progression. There's always this debate about the Metroidvania genre in what exactly constitutes one, but semantics aside, this looks and plays great and can be quite the challenge. Interestingly, this world is full of sentient ships, so you are not controlling a character piloting the ship, but are one instead, having to save your friends after the destruction of your village by an entity known as the Unchosen. How this plays is the exploration of dungeons and shooting as well as avoiding projectiles, having hut container equivalents and various other upgrades and equipments as the progression, with a fantastic art style as well. I mentioned this in the best roguelites of the year video that every year since 2022, at least one or two of these bullet heaven style roguelite titles gets my attention, all stemming from the Vampire Survivors school of design, in which instead of having to avoid projectiles like in a bullet hell title, your character is the one creating these in the first place, with the throwback look and theme of Halls of Torment speaking to me. You enter the Halls of Torment and seek to stop the Lords of the Underworld, choosing from a variety of character classes like Warrior, Ranger, Cleric, and so on, which have unique weapons but share upgrades and perks, where it remains just as satisfying as ever to slay hordes of enemies, having many additional systems like equipment, potions, and so on to keep you playing. An awesome turn-based tactics title is Tactical Breach Wizards, a game that went from 0 to 100 really quickly since it has been in development for a long time without much news, and before I knew it, the release date trailer was out confirming the date, and there it was, and exploded right out of the gate since release, since it is a great game. This is a tactics title similar to XCOM, but in which you play as wizards using guns and spells to stop a rogue group of elite tactical wizards. In contrast, your ragtag group of characters doesn't seem to stand a chance, but it's always the underdog story that gets to you, having very clever and funny writing as well. It is linear and plays more like a puzzle game since you can rewind time to try a different strategy, and isn't as grand of a setup as XCOM, where you are recruiting new recruits, training them, and taking on a variety of missions with base building progression, which is to the advantage of this game, I think, since it is just combat and narrative focused, so if you love games like this, definitely pick it up. Game developer and YouTuber Jonas Tyroler is also on a roll, since it appears that everything he touches turns into gold, from Islanders to Will You Snail and now Thronefall as well. This is a minimalist defense RTS title that strips away unnecessary complexity, combining classic base building gameplay with more hack and slay action, simplifying things since you're not an omniscient god or commander-like character, but control a single character on horseback instead, which is represented in the game. This is your interface with the game world, where you have to go up to a building to cause the menu to pop up so that you can upgrade a building, mixing base building by day and defense by night. Strategic decisions have to be made between economy and defense, whether you train more archers or build more mills, where both are necessary for your long-term survival. I love the look of this game, with various maps to play on being quite unique and fun, unlocking new units and buildings after every map, and has multiple difficulty levels per map, as well as a roguelite mode, and is easily one of the best indie games ever. This next title is technically indie, but is from a larger sized studio, where what impressed me the most about Last Epoch is that this is a Diablo-style or Exile-like action RPG that has managed to find an audience of its own in the face of games like Path of Exile 2 and Diablo 4, and generally has a positive association with the name as compared to, say, Wosen Lords of Mayhem. This is another 1.0 release out of early access after many years, where all the work put in has resulted in an excellent title, with the gimmick here being that it spans across space and time, so you're able to fight enemies from all sorts of different time periods and themes. Critical to all of this are the character classes, which are fun, having 5 base classes, each with 3 mastery classes to ascend into, for a total of 15, and instead of one massive skill tree like in Path of Exile, has 120 plus individual smaller ones for every skill, so that you can alter and customize these to your liking. Of course, loot and crafting are central elements and thus have an endgame as well with endless replayability. This is a premium title with a one-time purchase price, but does have epoch points, which are used for cosmetics only, no purchasing of stash tabs here, with the developers committing to post-launch content, with Season 2 coming up in the near future, so there should be plenty of runway for this title. It was a great year for 1.0 releases, where early access lends itself particularly well to sandbox crafting games, an excellent one of which is Core Keeper. Think of games like Minecraft or Terraria, but with more of a top-down camera angle, and you get the idea, where you venture out to gather resources and bring it back to your home base to process, using refined materials to craft better tools and equipment, or even to construct useful facilities for your base itself. This has an array of diverse biomes to explore, each with their own ecosystem teeming with flora and fauna, discovering more about the world as you uncover the secrets of ancient civilizations. Combat is also more involved and does have boss fights against legendary titans, which is necessary if you want to progress the story, also having RPG style leveling with talent points to allocate to your abilities. In sandbox game fashion, everything in this game is customizable from every aspect of your base in terms of shape, layout, what is within, as well as cosmetic decorations, and the same applies to your custom-made character as well. It has co-op support for up to 8 players, and things can get hectic, but mostly in combat, where if you prefer the more relaxing side of things back at base, you can do that as well, fishing, gardening, or even raising animals, all with an excellent pixel art look as well. I thought 2024 was going to be the year of the Metroidvania and combat-heavy titles, but alas, the conspicuous absence of the elephant in the room means that overall it wasn't that great, but luckily for us, we did get 9 souls, which, for the record, is not a Metroidvania in my book, more resembling a 2D Souls-like platformer. Think Sekiro but side-scrolling and you get some idea. This does have quite a convoluted plot, with the English translation not being bad, but perhaps it's a bit difficult to follow, but stretch all of that and you still have an excellent combat-focused title. This has an emphasis on parrying enemy attacks, which you need to master in order to be successful, which does take a few tries, especially with new enemies and bosses, but once you get into the flow of things, combat does click. Some of the later bosses do present quite the challenge, so bear that in mind, but it's a great feeling title that will be for fans of the genre. It is no secret that I'm a big fan of the Heroes of Might and Magic series, being the perfect age for them when it was in its prime, where I remember being introduced to it by my older cousin and spending those long Sunday afternoons plugging away at it, going from Heroes 1 to 2 and of course the legendary HOMM 3, which made the spiritual successor Songs of Conquest high up on my watchlist, and they chose the perfect combination since yes, this game is pixel art as well. For the most part, fans of the series will be familiar with the flow here, from castle construction and base building to overworld exploration and combat on a hex grid, but does have its own systems in how magic and essence is handled, as well as how the castle sprawls out over the world map itself, having new ideas to make it their own while still feeling like those old games, which is great for me. Post 1.0, they have announced a content roadmap and just released a new Viking faction with more to come, so I'm excited about the future of this game. People clowned on Donkey when the popular YouTuber said that he was starting a video game publisher and was only going to publish good games, with concerns over conflict of interest, as well as what right does a mere YouTuber have to be involved in making games. So to all of those people, here's a healthy dose of humble pie, since they are 1 for 1 so far with Animal Well. This is the work of solo developer Billy Basso, who seems to have poured his heart and soul into the game, most notably in the custom engine that the game is running on, which allows him to apply physics and water simulation to pixel art and yet keep the file size of the entire game under 35 MB for a 7 to 10 hour game, which is very impressive. This game is like Halo 2 meets Halo 3, and what I mean by that is that it's an exploration-focused Metroidvania with no combat at all. Instead, you are doing Metroidvania-like stuff like platforming and finding key items which allow you to access new areas, but it is not your run-of-the-mill upgrades as well, but instead includes a bubble wand, a frisbee, a yo-yo and more, and really made me feel like a kid all over again, just exploring a new game to see what the developers made. So if you're bored of all the rinse and repeat generic stuff that admittedly does occur even in indie games despite all the innovation, this is a must get. I want to give a very special shout out to UFO 50 as well, since this game collection of 50, yes 50 games, took 6 people 8 years to make, and is a feat that is pretty much unparalleled in modern indie games, since every single one of these 50 titles are full games in themselves that would not be out of place on the NES, at least visually, while not exactly being a 1:1 match for the technical limitations of that hardware. Sure, the quality of the games games might be uneven and you will have your favourites among the 50, so that is completely normal, but to even attempt a project like this deserves praise and goes to show what indie developers are capable of. The games follow the work of a fictional video game company who made all of these titles from 1982 to 1989 for a fictional game console, with some links, callbacks and cameos of characters that have appeared in earlier games, as well as a larger meta-narrative about these 50 games as a package. If you really wanted to, this game does track completion of each game, also having the ability to cherry a game by completing it under stricter conditions, but even just messing around and dabbling to see the ideas they came up with is fun, and hey, it's 50 cents per game if you think about it, so there's plenty of value here.
Welcome to the clown show.
If you have been around games in 2024, it will be no surprise that Joker Poker Balatro gets top billing, where predictability is not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't want to swerve you with an out-of-left-field pick for no good reason, since this roguelite deck builder that uses poker hands but also upgrades to your cards and game-changing jokers is gambling levels of addictive as you watch your multiplier and score go up into absolutely ridiculous numbers. So well played, local thunk. And for fans of the game, there is a major content update coming in 2025, so be prepared for more hours of your life to get consumed by this game. Watch this video for upcoming games of 2025.